Like you can't fight an insurance company on their terms. They have more money. They have an army of lawyers. They don't have a conscience. Don't be so scared of making a mistake. If it feels right, if it's the right thing to do, get out there and scream about the injustice until somebody pays attention. Good. All right. We'll get started. Thank you for joining us today. I know a lot of people are asking more and more questions about what they can do if they get sick or injured in the workplace and they have a long-term disability claim. And so today we're blessed to have Nainesh Kotak here. I hope I pronounced that right. Please correct me if I made an error. Who is an expert in this field across Canada, helps hundreds, if not thousands, of people deal with these types of claims that, from my perspective, I know institutions, organizations, and insurance companies love to deny as just a first brush to try to discourage claims. And people need somebody like you. So why don't you give us a little introduction and tell us about why you do this and what you do?
Thank you, Philip. I really appreciate and honored that you had me on your podcast here. I've been a lawyer now, at least I give it with my age, I think, 29 years. And I found over time, really the greatest reward is helping those who are vulnerable, those who have been really victimized and by insurance companies. The LTD practice it's very interesting in the sense that you're dealing with people, or you're helping people, I should say, who are unable to work due to various forms of disability. And often, there could be physical, there could be a combination of physical and mental, but we're seeing more and more psychological related disabilities, whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, or anxiety. And unfortunately, with these types of cases, it's often insurance companies find it quite easy to deny those claims, and they'll use a catch-all phrase. They'll say insufficient medical evidence, no objective evidence, and so on and so forth. And it puts people in a very vulnerable position because they're unable to work. They're not getting the support from insurance companies where premiums have been paid. So this is where we come in. And, we take a very assertive approach for our clients. We really relieve that burden from them so they don't have to deal with the insurance company. We don't really waste time with that internal appeal process. What we do is we commence an action and really force them to the bargaining table, because they have the risk of great exposure at trial. So we take that, really assertive approach, I would say, and we really empathize with our clients. We know they're in a very difficult situation, and sometimes the injury or stress is from the workplace. There could be childhood trauma that is resurfaced through various difficulties they may be having at work. Irrespective, we find ourselves getting great results for our clients. We have a very client focused approach for sure. Yeah.
That's why I wanted to bring you on, because one of my callings is life is to deal with bullies. And I certainly am on a mission to capture and connect with personal injury lawyers who are making a difference in people's lives, to just deal with that negative connotation that sometimes gets thrown out there. But I don't think enough people realize the business model of these giant insurance companies and how cold and calculating they are in how they make decisions when they've been paid premiums that are designed to help people, but they know if they just deny even the average citizen, something like 30 to 40% of all claims will just disappear just by having a strict deny all claims policy. And I think what's really relevant about what you're talking about is people who have post-traumatic stress or who are suffering from some mental health calamities or problems. They're very vulnerable to this strategy in particular, right? Because they have an inability to kind of cope with conflict, uh, and they give up too easy because their brain can't deal with it, especially when somebody attacks them and says not enough medical evidence, makes them feel like they're faking. How do you deal with the insurance company tactic in that regard?
You've hit it right on the nail here, Philip. You see, I would say, stats are probably 9 out of 10 claimants will walk away in these types of situations that you describe, simply really due to that being a victim of that bullying complex. Quite frankly, they sort of want to really go back in their shell and hide from these problems because they've been treated, in a very a very untoward way. I'm not saying that every claim is denied. I mean, I see the ones that are denied, obviously, right?
Hmm.
And I find that really the person whose claim has been denied, they need someone to champion their cause because they're at wit's end. They've tried themselves. They've ran around doctor to doctor to try to get this record, that record. They've been on the phone with their case manager repeatedly. Those calls are recorded, by the way, but they've been on the phone and they feel bullied because they get called on sometimes almost a daily basis. Well, why can't you work? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And they sort of, often get, put in a position where they may say something adverse to their interest simply because they've been put in that corner.
Hmm.
And it ends up in denial. Sometimes insurance companies even have what's called a paper review, and that is a physician who's really on the payroll by the insurance company who's never met the person who's disabled, but will look at the file and come up with a paper review, and it may even be what's called the transferable skills analysis. And from there, the denial happens, and the person, and if you're as a layperson reading the decision, you may say, "Oh, okay, well, I guess I don't have a good enough case." But they're usually what I would call fluff. They're not well substantiated. They misquote medical evidence quite often, and there always is that way out, and that is, when you commence a lawsuit in a disability case against an insurance company, you're no longer dealing with that case manager who decided the case. I mean, we may question them under oath at a discovery or questioning, but what normally happens and what well always happens is that there's a lawyer involved, and often it's an in-house counsel, and you have a litigation specialist involved. So you have fresh eyes at the insurance company looking at it, and they look at it from a viewpoint of what's called risk, right? They're looking at risk. If we continue to fight this claim, what's our potential exposure? What's our potential public exposure? Because they're in the business of selling a product too. So, you get the case by litigating, you get the case out of that person who had that tunnel vision to somebody else who sort of hasn't dealt with it before. And now you're almost on an even footing. We're
Hmm.
there, or whichever lawyer is dealing with it is now dealing with a lawyer on the other side who understands risk. And reality, that's what insurance is about. It is about risk, at least from their end. And if
Hmm.
you can show them they have the risk, you can get a payout.
And let's dig deeper because I think a lot of people they get angry about everything going on in the world, but they don't spend enough time just focusing on what really motivates business, and it's money from where I come. And I like to pull back the curtain and show if you're an adjuster working for an insurance company, you need to know how that adjuster gets incentives, raises, and promotions. And that's generally by saving the insurance company money. So it seems like what they've done is they've kind of isolated the adjuster to be in a position where they know if they do everything they can to kind of deny the claim or discourage the claim or minimize it, they'll get promoted, and that's their reward system. They have no incentive to actually help the person who's suffering at work. Like they might be friendly on these recorded calls. They might try and even trick them into saying something that could hurt them, and a good citizen calls and wants to be helpful. And this happens a lot whenever you're dealing with somebody who has power over you. When that person is nice to you on the phone, you feel like you can encourage them to give you a better result if you're nice back. And that's the way they extract. It happens with police when police are friendly to a suspect. The suspect thinks, oh, if I make them like me, they'll let me go. Same with insurance. People get on the call with an adjuster, sense that there's a potential friend there, and so try to please them by saying things that the adjuster might want to hear. But in the end, they're getting screwed over. That certainly translates to doctors who I want, we all have doctor friends and they're supposed to help people, but these doctors who are on the payroll of insurance companies, right? We have to realize that they're incentivized to find in favor of the insurance company to keep getting the money. And the way you describe their reports, that kind of bullshit baffles brains. They put a lot of big terms in there, and the person thinks, okay, I have no hope. A doctor says I can't do it, and then the poor citizen is denied the coverage that they're absolutely entitled to. And that's why calling you or somebody like you would be the first step. How does it go if somebody wanted to kind of see if they had an LTD case?
Right. So, our consultations are always free. So, we may get an email inquiry or even a calling, and we have numbers throughout the country, particularly in Alberta and in Ontario. We also have a toll-free number. So often people will call in, and we have designated intake clerks that will take down the appropriate, information, ask the right questions. And we usually ask for a copy of the decision as well. It may be a denial that is just from the beginning, we're not paying you, or it could be a termination. We paid you, for 2 years. The definition of disability has changed. We're going to deny you now. So we look at that, and then one of the lawyers, myself or one of our other lawyers, will get on the phone with the potential client and discuss the case. And we'll give the right advice. We'll tell it how it is. We talk about the strengths and the weaknesses, and really empathize with the client. We give pretty well, I would say, everybody sort of calls us, and if we think that case is a good one, we do get retained because people really do relate to us. Quite frankly, we genuinely want to help people. We also give a lot of practical advice in that initial consult. That one of that is, look, why don't you apply also for CPP disability benefits as well?
Are those exclusive
Because
to LTD? Can you only do one or the other?
No, you can do both,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So what happens? Most LTD policies, right? They will have some offsets or deductions, and the group policies generally will have a CPP deduction. But it's important that the person applies. There's a couple of reasons why. If you do get CPP disability, when you reach age 65 and you go for retirement CPP, your actual number will be greater because the years that you receive CPP disability benefits are not counted as non-contributing. That's one
Ah,
thing. And secondly,
interesting.
when you negotiate a settlement with, if it's beyond 2 years, and you're negotiating with a disability carrier, there's usually provisions in their policy that say, look, if you don't apply for the benefit, they're entitled to estimate it and deduct it under the contract. So it's important to
Ooh.
apply anyway because it will become part of the negotiation process. So there's a couple of very good reasons, and the final good reason is that, if you're successful, you're going to get monthly money until age 65, right?
Mhm.
That's you'll get that, and they don't usually bother you to cut you off once you're on it. We help people with CPP appeals, so we don't do the application, but if the person is denied, we will handle the appeal for them. And the thing about us, right, we don't charge by the hour, right? We're on a contingency basis, and this means we can help people who would not be able to afford the hourly and put money down on it. They pay a percentage of the recovery at the end of the day when the matter settles.
Wonder so the CPP they can do by themselves online, I imagine. That I didn't know about the CPP appeals. That's brilliant because I know that whenever you appeal these government organizations, if you got a decent lawyer on the other side, you're usually successful because they're just not used to dealing with somebody who can articulate the grounds for appeal. So that's fabulous information for all our listeners, for sure. What are examples of jobs or where people are working where you're seeing a growth in LTD at the moment?
Very interesting. I would say I look at it sort of two angles here. We always get a lot of banking clients.
Hmm.
I don't know what it is, but the people where they could be financial advisors or mortgage specialists or tellers. There's a lot of pressure in banks to perform, and what I hear is often they don't feel rewarded, and there's the stress, and continued stress. So we get a lot of bank claims. We also get a fair bit of, believe it or not, Canada Post claims,
Hmm.
whether it be from management or letter carrier deliveries. That again, high pressure, and a lot of I think maybe HR issues. So we
Mm.
see a lot of those claims, and also blue collar, of course. And those are often the physical related injuries, back pain, the spinal issues, shoulder issues, knee issues. So we see certainly in a lot of labor intensive jobs because they're obviously take their toll on someone physically. But we see both white collar and blue collar.
That's interesting. I wanted to explore this with you is um, if there is a toxic work environment, it can contribute to the disability that an employee uh, re- ends up having. And then you could do an LTD. Like in London, I know there was a huge issue with London Transit. Like it was considered toxic work environment, like just really people really horrible to each other. And so somebody who was a London Transit, a bus driver who felt bullied or who over the course of a few years kind of developed this PTSD or they would be able to do a long-term disability claim.
Yeah, it's interesting. Usually, insurance companies will try to say, well, hey, you're supposed to go to through WSIB first because WSIB would be a deduction under most policies.
Mm,
But the reality is, though, WSIB is very difficult to get, and it doesn't matter what province you're in, WCB, WSIB, it's very
mm,
difficult, particularly when you're dealing with stress. If you're a first responder, there is a presumption that your stress is caused. There was new legislation, at least in Ontario, on that,
mm.
and I don't know how that's translated honestly in real life. It's hard to tell; it's too early. But in general, stress claims are very difficult to prove in workplace insurance claims. And the reality is, often the reaction to the toxic work environment, there's something that is began much earlier for the disabled person, maybe in childhood, maybe through
Mm.
relationships, that they haven't developed the coping mechanisms, and when they get hit with a toxic work environment, all that prior trauma comes out again, right? The reaction may be to that specific incident, but it's deeply embedded, and we see that a lot. We get psychologist reports, we chat with our clients about this, and we see this quite a bit. Why one person reacts differently to stress at work, and another acts, it doesn't bother them as much, and often there's other factors at play, which means that falls squarely within the gambit of the LTD insurer having to pay, or should be having to
I
pay.
love the way you explain that because we're always dealing with workplace compensation issues and difficult to do a lawsuit. But that's the way, if I can run it back at you, workplace compensation claims are generally an injury that happens at work. And so the way you describe it is, I think a lot of people really benefit from understanding is if you might have some psychological vulnerabilities, but you could work, but in the workplace over an extended period of time, they materialize into a disability that stops you from working, then you don't go through workman's compensation. You go through the long-term disability coverage that you have, and you can be successful.
Absolutely, you can be
Oh, that's
successful.
brilliant.
I always say, listen, apply to your workplace anyway, because they're going to say no. At least that way, you're not going to have the argument during
Hmm.
litigation. Well, hey, wait a minute, why didn't they apply for this? We want a deduction for that. Once you get the denial, and there will be a denial, we just show the insurer, the LTD insurer, this, it's been denied. You are the payer. And that's it. And I find that we're pretty successful with that. Now, by chance, if someone's approved for a workplace, well, that's fantastic. I've rarely seen it happen when it comes to workplace stress that you get an approval. They're not geared for that. They're geared for, you break your leg, you fall, something falls on you, you get burned. Those type of
Yeah,
injuries
yeah.
that are really situational, and something acute happened. WSIB, WCB, they're kind of designed for that purpose, not for the prolonged stress and the harassment and things like that. They just don't. It doesn't work that way, and these claims are just generally denied.
We struggled with a difficult claim at one of our office locations where they actually bullied one of the admin staff and locked them in the broom closet for 2 hours. And the person was claustrophobic and had kind of a breakdown and couldn't work. And they were trying to insist on making it a WSIB claim, but she couldn't work again. It was just, that's a serious extent of bullying in the workforce that can cause trauma. But I just remember how difficult it
Yeah, yeah,
was. How would you handle something like that? Just as an interesting thing.
right. Yeah, definitely. Look, I mean, I certainly, I think you'd want to see if it is WSIB, WCB, or if you can actually sue the employer for this one. You got to
Hmm.
see, you have to look at, are they registered or not, and can you sue? Because
Hmm.
that would certainly be a good grounds for a lawsuit. The LTD claim, obviously, and listen, I mean, obviously, there's a criminal act that's occurred, forcible confinement. So,
Hmm.
maybe getting the
We
police
did it.
involved, and certain restraining orders against the individual who did it would be particularly useful in those circumstances. But we do see cases that seem very extreme, and some of the most, and that's pretty obvious one, right? Somebody grabbed you, locked you in a closet. But there are situations where there's just sort of what you call, I guess, micro assaults that occur over a various period of time for
Hmm.
someone who's demeaned and bullied. And it's hard for them to pinpoint like where it is, which is the particular incident that broke the camel's back per se. But those I find are more common, And we handle them, I think, extremely well, because we get hopefully the person has reported
Hmm.
these things to their physician, but certainly we encourage them to do so over time. And they're quite winnable as well, even if there's just multiple minor incidents that are being occurring at the workplace, as opposed to one massive one in terms of the one that you just described.
You know why I think you're a force for amazing good in society is not just that you're helping people who have been hurt or injured. It's that if more people come to you, there should be an incentive now for employers to deal with toxic people. And far too often we see that we know in businesses they know somebody is a bit toxic, but they're too valuable, so they don't get rid of them. And what your actions do is you make it clear that if an employer keeps toxic people, right, that there's going to be compensation that comes out of the insurer's pocket at least, and it should hold senior managers more accountable to get rid of these toxic people who are hurting people.
I agree. There often could be a lawsuit, constructive dismissal, human rights complaints that could occur directly with the employer. But even if it's simply a short-term disability or a long-term disability claim, the reality is their premiums are going to go up, and their name's going to get out there, of what type of employer they are, and it will hit the pocketbook. And I think
Mhm.
that's one of the things that can elicit change,
Mhm.
for employees, is if it hits the employer's pocketbook, for sure. Yeah.
People love stories, and I always ask my guests, do you have a story without obviously naming of kind
Sure.
of one of your most rewarding cases where you feel like you made the biggest difference, or where you kicked the insurance company's ass, something that you're especially
Yeah.
proud of?
There's a few of them. There's one, in fact, we had. It was a cancer patient. His claim was denied. Partway through, he was getting benefits. Oh, we think you can work. He had a letter from his oncologist that said, "Look, we can't even look at if he could work or not until he finishes his chemotherapy." He was in the middle of treatment. They cut him off.
In the
I
middle of chemo.
When I saw it in the middle of the I
Nice.
was so taken back when I saw it. We commenced our action, but we also went to the media.
Mhm.
We did it because it was so outrageous, what they had done. So the media was on it right away, and they interviewed our client, they interviewed me, and I won't, it's in the news, but I won't, for the sake of respect, mention the insurance company, but it's out there actually, in the news if you
Mhm.
Google it. But of course they called me immediately, and put him back on claim, paid some significant costs, and yes, we kind of, obviously they got slapped a bit, but the reward was, look, we got him back on. We had to use whatever tool at our resources, because it was pretty obvious this guy should be on claim, and he still is
Yes.
in fact on claim. I think he recently just reached out to say hello and that. We also had a matter, and I just blogged about it actually. I think it's on LinkedIn now as well. It's in our blogs. It was really a former professional athlete. I won't say the sport, but um, he'd gone through some things in his life, obviously, that ended up affecting him significantly, from a psychological point of view, and to a point where he's unable to work. And we really, it's one of those that actually the insurer really collaborated with us.
Mhm.
They understood. They understood. And it took, we had to get the medical evidence. That's what we do. We get reports from the person's psychiatrist, their doctors, and we had them seen by one of our specialists as well, that we know. When I say ours, it means people we would use for a medical legal opinion, who will comment on employability. And it swayed them. And I must, to their credit, the insurer, it did sway, and they paid extremely well on it. So that was one where we were able. These are two really that we were
Mhm.
able to resolve very quickly by the strategies that we used, and really deserving
Yeah.
clients.
Your
The
first
cancer patient.
story your first story reminds me why we're brothers in a way, because I think too often in law, lawyers want to like sit in the safety of their office, spend some money on advertising, and just kind of settle quickly. But it takes courage to step out of our comfort zones to advocate for our clients. And in this particular case, there are very few lawyers who will go to the press. But that is a tactic. Like, and when you're fighting, It's like when I was in the military, we're doing guerrilla operations. Like you can't fight an insurance company on their terms. They have more money. They have an army of lawyers, right? They don't have a conscience, right? So, but you going to the press in that case, you intuitively realize that that's their vulnerability. You stepped up for your client and got. And that's why I imagine it's so satisfying. It's because it's a bit intimidating to think about going to the press because often our colleagues in law kind of look down on you if you decide to get out there. So I admire, that courage, and I think that's why people constantly go back to you. Did you feel that pressure not to expose
You
yourself?
know, No, I tell you what the concern is sometimes when you go to the press. It's like you want to make sure that your case is very strong and that your client has actually given you all the full information. Because the press has a way of finding things out. And
Uh,
they'll go and talk to doctors. I mean, the doctors are not supposed to be talking to them, but they want to get the full
they'll dig.
story. They'll dig. I'm not saying they always say the right thing, and they also have a
Mhm.
lot of biases, obviously, as well. But when it comes to something like this, I think that they want to get it right. So, to us, before going to the media, it was okay, listen, I want to see everything. I want to see the medicals. I want to see those letters. Let me talk to you. Let me prepare you for what you're going to be asked so that, it doesn't backfire and that something comes
Mhm.
out that justifies what the insurance company did. And this was just the right one to do it on.
Mhm.
It
But that's
was,
what makes you a
it really,
champion
yeah.
too. That's what makes you a champion because when you go to the press, you're not just in the safety of your office anymore writing letters. You're now exposed, and so you have to be careful that you're doing the right thing. But I find I try to tell some young lawyers like, don't be so scared of making a mistake. If it feels right, if it's the right thing to do, well, then advocate for the client. Get out there and scream about the injustice until somebody pays attention. Um,
Yeah.
Good for you.
It's a very good point.
Yeah,
Yeah, we got to get out of our box. Insurers need to know that you'll go to trial. They need to know
mhm,
that you will push for your client. At the same time, they also, you need to understand ourselves as lawyers, I think, what the value of the case is.
mhm,
We need to know how they think, the insurers think, how they calculate reserves, what percentages will they reserve to pay? How can you get all of that if not more? What's it going to take to make them make the call up to the VP and
mhm.
get you more money, right? So part of that is through experience, you really are able to analyze the value of the case. And it's important. What could happen? Let's say you don't do a lot of long-term disability litigation. You may look at it like a regular personal injury tort case and value it totally off. And then
Mm.
you're dragging your case on for your client, and you may end up getting less than you should. What happens over time? Your clients cannot sit home, for a year or two without any money coming in. It's just human nature. They may go and work for cash and things that may jeopardize their case. So what I find is that the communication with the client's important. Constantly update them to what they're doing, what we expect of them, and move that case forward. Don't sit on those cases in the drawer. You gotta, move them, get discoveries done, get mediations booked, have conversations, get reports done. Don't be
Mhm.
lazy on a file, and then we can get those great results for clients that
Yeah.
they obviously
I, I,
deserve.
I,
Yeah.
I've talked to some lawyers in insurance companies, and they definitely the quality of the lawyer affects how much they're prepared to pay. And they can sense if a lawyer has a case but has never taken it to trial or just sits on a file for 5, 6 years. They have a strategy for lawyers as well, and that's why it's good to work with somebody like yourself. We're running out of time here. I wanted to sum up. Um, we're working. You and my firm are working together in London and Alberta to try to get more people access to long-term disability. And I hope people have questions, reach out, and we'll have our contact details at the bottom and your 1-800 number. How would somebody, this is in relation to the limitation date, which you can speak to. I think a lot of people don't even know if they have long-term disability. And so how would people know if they had long-term disability in their workplace? And what are the limitation dates to come forward to bring a claim?
Right. So we have to look at the Insurance Act of various provinces. Usually it's 2 years. I mean, some might have three, but it would be two. And that would be really from, the date the benefit should have been paid, days denial or benefit
Mhm,
should have been paid. There have been circumstances where people don't know they have a policy, but usually when you're hired,
mhm.
you have an employment contract, you're given a booklet, right? Et cetera. And you can ask the HR on that. We've had cases where we've actually sued the employer as well. For example, someone is told, hey, you don't have a policy. And it turned out they did. right? So now they may be out of
Oh
time in their
shit.
application for benefits.
Mm.
So they ask for what's called relief of forfeiture, which is an equitable relief. They applied late, but to be safe, we bring in the employer. The employer has a fiduciary duty to the employee. They misrepresented that
Hmm.
there was a policy. So we've done that before. We've actually had the employers pay in the end of the day if they've caused a policy to lapse when the person was
Good for
employed. They
you.
haven't paid the
Yeah.
premium, so now they're on. So yes, you got to be so careful. It's not just limitation periods to sue; it's also the application process. Under the policies, there's a specific deadline for when you apply for your benefits, and I think it's important to, if you're getting off on disability, talk to a lawyer just to get that preliminary advice, of course, and read your policy, read the definitions of disability and read the timelines, so you're not caught flat-footed with respect to those things for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful answer. So if anybody has any more questions about long-term disability, they're welcome to contact you at Kotak Law. And we'll have all the contacts down at the bottom. And I look forward to working with you on a bunch of great cases in Ontario and Alberta, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Philip, for having me.
See you around, brother. Ciao. All right, man. That was amazing.